And we're live. Hello, it's the Bold Leadership Story Show with Jim Miller. And today I've got the honor and privilege of speaking with Colton Telford. And we're going to talk about experiences shaping his exceptional life today. And Colton's got a cool background. You were born in Mexico, in a Mormon colony in Mexico.
I
How old
was.
were you when you moved into Texas, right?
I did.
How old were you when you moved to Texas?
I was about four
Okay.
when we
Do you
moved
remember
from
any of that?
a little bit. It was not. I don't want to say without getting too deep. It wasn't a pleasant move. It was kind of more of an escaping, as it were,
Okay.
not from the
Wow.
Mormon community, but from my then father. It was a very acrimonious divorce, and so my
Uh,
mom brought us kids across the border. So
okay.
much so that I did not come over here legally. So I was
Uh-huh.
here illegally till I was about 10 or 11 years old.
Wow. Okay.
I
Yeah, I've
became a
talked to
naturalized
several
U.S.
people.
citizen.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome for good thing that your mom did that, I think. Sounds like.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting story on um, my relatives and how they got down there and what formed kind of the basis for them going into Mexico and the Mormon colony down there. The whole history of it only came out to me about 3 years ago through some writings, and the people in the Mormon church, they tend to, at least back then, at the end of their life, they'd write their life story or have somebody take it. And we found a bunch of those letters about 3 years ago that reshaped our entire thinking in our family and why our family was down there. It was pretty amazing. But
How'd that feel?
it was, what I will say is, I, my siblings and I, given that we had went from my father to my stepfather without any getting too heavy, it was a almost a criminal upbringing in lots of ways. But
Mm.
what's crazy is all of us have gone on to do well, and none of us ended up in prison on drugs in all the ways that we probably should have given the circumstances. And so, and everybody has had like a really great business brain and head on their shoulders. And we had figured out the business brain side as kind of a genetic thing. Our our grandfather, interesting story. He was flying one of two planes that got off the ground at Pearl Harbor. Um,
Really?
he was a pilot at Pearl Harbor. He
Wow.
testified in front of Congress about it. There's not a lot out there or notoriety around it because he was pretty critical of what led up to Pearl Harbor and whatnot. So he definitely spoke his mind. But after that, he went to El Paso, Texas, started an insurance agency, and became the wealthiest man in El Paso. He was a very brilliant business guy. And his son ended up doing the same with believe it or not, a haute couture kind of clothing store in El Paso, Texas, which made it extremely successful. My mom had kind of left the family at that point, and so we didn't grow up in any sort of money whatsoever. We kind of grew up in a mobile home in West Texas at first with no windows after she
Mm.
escaped from my dad in Mexico. But the reason I say all that is we knew where we got the business brain, but what we didn't know, my siblings and I, is where we got probably the thing that I value the most in my life, in business or otherwise, which is the resilience to stick to stuff, and to, all of us have pulled ourselves out of poverty into pretty successful positions, and even just more importantly than even successfully monetarily, successful as far as our mindsets and our way of being, and getting over past trauma and not letting that dictate our lives. And
Mm.
I could never figure out where that came from. Like, I think intelligence and resilience can be learned, but um, there was just something deeper or inherent, and so that felt ingrained in us, not something we earned. Um, and so
Let's go
when we
before we get ahead of the story, let me read a little bit of your bio. I know
Sure.
you mentioned you don't like bios, but I want to give everybody a kind of a perspective on who you are today, and then we
Sure.
can get into that. So Colton Telford is an entrepreneur whose background is as unique as it is diverse. Originating from a small Mormon colony in Mexico, Colton's history is marked by resilience and determination, like you just mentioned. Transitioning from his early impoverished upbringing as a bull riding cowboy in El Paso, Texas, to a standout figure in the corporate and startup worlds, he's made notable contributions across various sectors, including banking, medical devices, and startup innovation. His corporate experience includes working for the CEOs from both JP Morgan Chase and Washington Mutual and international medical device manufacturer Arjo. His startup ventures include Voxologic,
Mhm.
Mushroom Jerky, and most recently, Oily. So, yeah. So, continue.
So the resilience part, as we found these letters, and pardon me clearing my throat, um, as we found these letters, it turned out that, for the record, I am no longer Mormon. I hold nothing against the church. Um, I think I've been baptized in every church that exists on the planet. Methodist, Baptist, Mormon, and then a few years ago to Pastor's Church in San Antonio, where I was the lead worship drummer. So I'm covered on all spectrums. Um,
Yeah.
but in these letters, what we found out is that I want to say it's my great 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 grandmother. Like, she migrated. So what happened with the Mormon community is they kind of put word out in Ireland and whatnot for people who were looking for a new life, like a lot, that there was this land in Utah that they had found and following the faith. And so a lot of people came over incredibly poor, so poor that they couldn't afford an ox and a wagon. They had what were called hand carts. So it was like a rickshaw that you pulled the handle over, put all your belongings in, and you walked across the country from New York to Salt Lake City, Utah. At
Wow.
that time, it was completely legal to shoot and kill Mormons in the street just based on their faith. So it was not only arduous from a just going out in the frontier, but every town you came into, if people found out you were Mormon, it was completely illegal to eviscerate you, as it were.
Do you know what year this was?
This was in the, I believe, in the mid 1800s.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say. All right.
Um, so as she was part of what was called known. There was a Mormon movie made about it called 72 Miracles, called the Willie Handcart Company. And I don't know the full width and breadth of the story, but there was an incident almost like the Donner Party. I don't know if it involved, you know, having to do what the Donner Party did, but it did involve an incredible struggle to survive crossing over the Rocky Mountain Range to get to Salt Lake City,
Yeah,
Utah.
the Donner Party was they got stranded up in the Sierra Nevada mountains and
Yep,
actually ended up having to eat. It was cannibalism.
cannibalism. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal.
So I don't think they got the cannibalism, but it was a really remarkable story how they got there. So all of this led us to find out that she actually spoke at the dedication of the Mormon temple in Salt Lake City, Utah,
Mm.
the Mormon temple when it was dedicated, which that alone was an incredible honor. But where it really got interesting is I have my entire life told people that I was in Mexico because my family emigrated there to escape polygamy laws when polygamy became illegal in the US. And so that's why the colony was down there. I thought that's why we were down there. It turns out her daughter, my great 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 grandmother, was sent down in the late 1800s, 1870 something, as a medical doctor down there to the frontier to be the medical doctor for that community. And so in her life story that she left, she talks about the fact that she delivered more than 800 babies without losing a single mother. There was one incident where she rode
Back in
60
those days, that's a
miles.
big deal.
One, that she was a female doctor. Two, she was brave enough to go down to a frontier like that,
Hmm.
um, in a whole separate country. And then three, that she had that level of skill or whatnot to deliver that many babies. Um, But what was really interesting is in the research, it turns out it was mind blowing when I started researching this and found this out. She ended up negotiating with Pancho Villa to, um, she traded basically her medical services for his people if they would protect the town and left it alone. And so basically, this Mormon colony in the middle of nowhere, Mexico, it's called Casas Grandes, it's Dublan, Mexico, was a protected Mormon colony because she was giving medical services to Pancho Villa's uh, his posse, as it were.
Hmm.
So I say all of that, getting back to the resilience. When my brothers and sisters and I read that, it's like, oh, we come from this remarkable lineage of these
Wow.
insanely strong women that have passed that down to us as these kids who have like escaped this kind of abject kind of crazy childhood. And so very long story to get to the point of it
Oh,
right
it's
there.
beautiful. And and you just learned all this recently then, relatively
Recently.
recently.
Yep.
That is so cool. I've got some a bit of history in my family that I've collected art and fascinating stuff. Like my great grand uncle was the chief engineer on the Monitor in Merrimack during the Civil War, and so
Really?
yeah, and I've got books and letters that he wrote to Lincoln and stuff like that. So
Oh,
it's fun to have those little tidbits of your life.
that's one of my
So
favorite periods in history. How did that impact you when you heard about that?
oh, it was like a boost. It's like, oh, okay, I'm somebody. But I now know that I'm somebody just because I'm here and God made me, right?
Yep.
But it's still, it's kind of fun to have that.
Very much so.
So you've done a bunch of stuff, bull riding in Texas. I remember going up to Idaho when I was a kid and went to a real rodeo in Cody, Wyoming for the first time and met some honest to goodness real cowboys that were bull riders. And those guys were badass. So I see you when I saw you were a bull rider, I was like, oh man, this guy has got some cojones on him. That
Well,
takes some real guts.
it was my stepfather. He came from kind of a rodeo background. He actually was in a wheelchair. He broke his back being thrown from a horse. But
Mm,
when my mom married him, he ran what is called the tack shop, the horse supply shop at the racetrack in El Paso, Texas, Sunland Park racetrack. And at the same time, and so my mom became a horse trainer. That was her passion, was horses, still is. Um, and so he got us all into rodeo. And so my I have two older sisters. The one right above me, she was right at this perfect age, and then to learn how to rope and cutting horses and all of that. And then my brother and I, my brother, younger brother, really wasn't much into rodeo, and we were out at my stepdad had coached a group of really famous bull riders. One of them's name is Tuff Hedeman. He kind of started the Professional Bull Riders Association. He's a legend in the sport. A lot of the characters that are in the movie 8 Seconds were people that I kind of just grew up tangentially around.
really?
And
Wow.
I think when we were at the chamber meeting and I told the story about Leanne Kais and my car breaking down, her brother Donnie Kais was best friends with all these guys, and he was the one that we grew up around. And so my brother and I were challenged one day. I think we were 7 or 8. They put a bag full of bull riding stuff to race for it, and whoever got to it was going to get to be the cowboy. And I just happened to beat my brother. I was older, so um, from that point on, it was. Um, I will say there wasn't there wasn't a lot of sovereignty on whether or not I was going to bull ride. It was much more like, you're going to do this, you're going to crawl in that chute, no matter how scared you are, and you're going to do this, and otherwise there are consequences. So I got over my fear really quickly because I feared him more than I did the bulls. So
There's a there's a leadership lesson right there.
yeah, he was like, he had a manner in which he could persuade people through pain. So um, I started off on the smaller steers, which is where you start, and I've got some great photos of that. I should have brought them up for today, but and then
Yeah.
roping as a very small kid on a very big horse, and anyway, so I was in Taos, New Mexico, and it was one of my first times riding bulls. And I did something when I came off that on the way home I was in immense pain, couldn't move, couldn't sleep. I went to the back doctor a few days later, just in excruciating pain, and I'd ruptured two of my discs in my back.
Mm.
Um, so it was an immediate like, hey, no more bull riding for you. You can't play any serious contact sports. The wrong thing, you're going to paralyze yourself. For a lot of people, that would have been a devastating result. I was probably the happiest person in the world. I was like, I never have to get on one of those things again. Like, don't get me wrong, there's an adventure and adrenaline rush in doing that and
Oh
accomplishing
yeah.
that. I mean,
Oh yeah.
but it's the scariest thing that you could ever imagine. When you climb over a chute and you have to get down on that bull and you have to cinch yourself in as tight as possible,
Yeah,
and
and I
then
don't know if I mean, I have never sat on a bull, but I've seen plenty of
it's
in bulls in, the pasture and the paddocks, and they're like, I mean, you can't even spread your legs wide enough to get on them. It's nothing
yeah,
like a horse.
it is brutal,
It's
and
solid
especially when
muscle.
they're banging your legs around in the chute because they're trying to get out because they're in pain, which is why they do what they do.
Yeah.
The craziest part is in your own sovereignty, you have to be the one to nod your head to let yourself out of the gate and be loose on this beast. And so you have to conspire to your own demise, as it were.
Right. It's the cowboy way.
But the great thing about it was is it let me transition into other things in school that I wanted to do, which ended up primarily, other regular sports because I was gone every weekend on rodeo trips all across the country. And when I
Mm.
was no longer able to go, I was able to pursue basketball, soccer, and primarily the drums, which the drums have carried me everywhere in my life. It's amazing what that instrument has done for me. So it was a really big blessing that it actually happened.
Cool. And you still play the drums?
I do. Yep,
Yeah.
every night for at least a couple hours. So I've played
Awesome.
for more than 30 years.
Wow. So you're probably pretty good.
It's the thing I tell people is it's actually, without being too cocky, it's the thing I do best in the world. It's
All
like
right.
it's an actual skill set. I've played for. I don't mean to drop names here. My fiance hates it when I drop names, but I was blessed. Like I I moved out to Arizona with my first wife to with our band, and we were going to make it big. My son ended up coming along, and so my music career was put on hold. But what ended up happening is I was able to later. I became the lead worship drummer for a very famous Christian author in San Antonio. His name is Max Lucado. He writes a lot of.
Yeah, read several of his books.
Max is a very, very dear friend. So I led worship at his church for about 5 6 years. So it was 5 services a weekend plus a midweek service, and got to lead with some of the best, play with some of the best Christian artists in the world: Michael W. Smith, Phillips, Craig and Dean. It was really remarkable. And what was beautiful is I got to go every weekend and play with, in sum total, to about 20,000 people. And then
Mm.
I'd get to go home to my family versus being out on the road and away from your family. So
Isn't
it
that
was the best of
nice?
both worlds.
That's the best of both worlds.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's great. So, so do you do any other types of music other than Christian?
Oh yeah, I grew up playing in primarily rock bands. So
Okay.
Rush was the
Favorite
first.
era?
Um, Man, my first concert ever was Heart. The only music I was allowed to listen to at that age was Striper, which was a Christian heavy metal band. Um, but the period, everything from Toto to Van Halen to um,
Cool.
Queensryche and progressive bands like Rush
Hmm.
um, were all my favorites. Pink Floyd is probably still my favorite band
Ah,
of all time.
yeah,
How do you get any better?
yeah. Dark Side of the Moon. Good
Yep.
stuff. Good stuff. So you have now another labor of love called Oily that
Yes,
you
sir.
started. You're like your serial entrepreneurs to me are like this amazing enigma. You starting up a business is like just total immersion, total stress, total on all the time to get something done for at least, I don't know, 2 years probably
Oh,
or more.
more at this point.
And you've done this multiple times.
I have.
What's wrong with you?
Everyone in my, including, different people in my life would ask the same question. They're like, why do you put yourself through this torturous experience? Um, but to the point, I don't know, Jim, why I've had the luck or the career path that I've had, but it has really worked out well for me. So when my son came along and we were in Phoenix, Arizona. So I say this because I I've gotten to live and still live in both worlds, the corporate world and the entrepreneurial world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Going back to the JP Morgan Chase, when my son came along, I was bartending in Phoenix, and I realized that I needed to get something steadier with health benefits. So I literally, without a college degree, went into a call center on Mill Avenue in Tempe, and
Mm-hmm.
started on the phones answering credit card customer service calls. I think it was 18 grand a year. It was, I mean, a pittance. But within 5 years, I had worked all the way up. I'd relocated to San Antonio as part of a team that launched a new site down there. And I had
Mm-hmm.
worked myself up to working for the CEO's office of the credit card division. His name is Rich Srednicki.
Okay.
So for some reason, I was identified as having a certain talent, and I worked really hard, and I just had a mind for business. It's not something I've earned. It's just for whatever reason was given. And I
Well,
guess maybe the
hang
entrepreneurial
on a
side.
second. Let's unpack that for a minute, because we were talking
Sure.
about leadership here. I think there's some really cool, maybe some nuggets in there. You go through that really quick, but that was 5 years of your life, right?
Mhm.
And your motivation was for your family, and you were started out just to make enough that you could rely on that money so that you guys could eat and have some kind of life.
Yes, sir.
You kept that all together, and you kept it going, and then you invested in your knowledge. You, I'm sure, invested in you know your communication skills. You invested in knowing the industry, and learning what to do, what not to do, and meeting people, and getting good at what you did.
You know, I appreciate that. I think maybe I appreciate that. That's a good recognizing, because I think that often I can shortcut that story, but when I hear you say that, it makes me go back into that time, and it brought up the memories of what I did. Is I always knew that I worked hard, and I had a lot of initiative. And what I also knew that I has served me, probably two things have probably served me better in my whole life than anything else, business or otherwise. And people will tell me all the time on the first one, but it came from my stepfather. Manners, yes sir, no sir. Um, Respect for elders. I try and share it with any kids these days. If people that I meet that have manners as a young man or a young woman at this day and age, while that may seem old school, I single them out on, I want you on my team. There's it's people why I think people appreciate Chick-fil-A so much. The my pleasure, the impeccable manners that they
Mm-hmm.
teach. So manners has gotten me more, just about further than anywhere else in that respect for elders. And then the second piece of that is, when I came up through JP Morgan Chase, I did not have, my high school was not a great high school. And so there was not a lot of opportunity out there. And when I got in this corporate world, the one thing, I don't know why, I was just always happy to go in and say, no matter what the challenge is, I promise you I'm going to be the best person on your team. A month from now, you're going to be thanking yourself that you put me on your team. And then, and I just had this confidence. It was completely out of nowhere. But the other biggest thing was, and I think that this maybe goes still to leadership, is, and it happens to this day. I had a call with the financier about Oily a couple days ago, and he was talking about some debt financing options. And I know a lot about venture capital, but I haven't done a lot of exploratory stuff about debt finance. And what I've learned through my career is to be humble and say, I don't know what that word you just said is. I don't know what that concept you just said is. Can you please tell me about that? And people want to teach, and they want to learn and share their expertise, but so often we're afraid of looking bad, and we're so desperate to look good, that
Mm-hmm.
I just never had that. I was just a sponge coming up in the corporate world. So I'd be in a meeting, and somebody would say a phrase or something in the corporate world that I had never heard. I came from this kind of podunk rural high school, and I would just go, sorry, could you repeat that and tell me what you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
And then that ingratiates you to those other leaders. They go, hey, I'll take somebody who's won't BS me, won't pretend, and will be real and honest, and I want that person on my team. And that helped me move up the corporate ladder more than anything. Not only did I learn, but I genuinely created a reputation of, here's somebody who wants to learn, has the initiative. If you take him under your wing, he's going to do great things.
So
So I
you
appreciate you slowing that down, because that
Well, thank you for helping to unpack that. I mean, that's perfect. I mean, that's really the crux of leadership right there. That story. and giving that in that way is so powerful, because that was the foundation.
Mhm.
Well, it wasn't the foundation, but it was the realization of the foundation that you'd gotten during your upbringing. You were pushed
Mhm.
into a corner where something you didn't know anything about, but you went and did it anyway. And you had to use all your faculties to pull that together and to grow into a new person. You became, in those 5 years, a brand new person.
It's really remarkable because when I hear you say that, it's true. Um, and it also takes me back a step further. I've done my marriage of 25 years ended a few years ago, and I went straight into therapy to kind of work on what my siblings and I went through in childhood. And for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of years, I'm circling back to this because for a lot of years, all of us had a lot of animosity towards my stepfather and the things that we were put through. Um, and now I have no feelings about it other than the utmost of gratitude. Like I would not change a
Beautiful.
single thing that even the most violent, even the most, I would not change a single thing. What I learned about what I could tolerate, my resilience. So going back to your question, why do you keep doing this? Is because I know that I have a pain tolerance level and I have a resiliency that you can't make me quit. And the learning of that about ourselves, like if you've ever learned that about yourself, like what you're really made of, and when you know that at a gut level, um, I wouldn't change the poverty. I wouldn't change any arc of this story whatsoever. It is, I could not be the human I am today to try and do what I'm trying to do with Oily, or I'm going to do with Oily,
Mm-hmm.
without any of that. Like it was all essential. So I look back on it now and I'm like, to those 5 years of starting at the bottom and suffering, and my wife, my ex-wife, and I donating plasma for $100 just to put bologna and white bread on the table, and were it not for all of that, I couldn't see here where I am now. And I don't mean to wax too poetic, but I appreciate you bringing these up because it takes me back into those phases and reminds me of some of this that I just, it's so integrated now that I don't unpack it very often.
Yeah. Well, that's what's fun about this show.
Yeah,
It's
thank
we
you.
talk about stuff like that. So I'm glad you're. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. It's great. So let's move into today. And you're
Sure.
now. You mentioned Oily. I love the concept, and
Thank you.
I'd love to hear your your generation story. How did you come up with the idea, and where do you see the process um, taking you at this point of building that business?
Oh man, this has been so fun. I'm in the best phase of it right now. It's a blast, even though it's a grind. Oh, thank you for that. Um, in My ex-wife and I in 2016 left the San Antonio area to move up to Vancouver, Washington, which, if you don't know where it's at, it's directly, you cross one bridge from Portland, Oregon, across the Columbia River, and you're in Southwest Washington State, which is Vancouver.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Been there many times.
oh, fantastic. Well, my ex-wife and I ended up getting divorced up there. My kids still live up there. Wonderful. But I got involved just because I'd been in some entrepreneurial stuff. Starting with Voxologics is the first company that I left the corporate world for, this dental startup. Then I went back to the corporate world for a medical device company because the economy collapsed in 2008.
Mm.
And then I left that world in 2014 to I was asked to be a CEO of a marketing company. That didn't pan out for after a couple of years, so I went back to that medical device company. And so I was doing that up in Vancouver, Washington. It allowed me to work remotely. I still actually hold that position, so I hold a day job. Fortunately, my hours are really flexible, so I can work 16-hour days and get everything done, and on both sides. Um, it's sometimes the context switching is a little bit hard at this state with Oily getting really busy, but it's fun. But I got connected with a group of local entrepreneurs just by one of them meeting me at a coffee shop and asking me what I was up to, and then he asked me to start help run a startup accelerator where we're advising potential startups. One of those startups was Pan's Mushroom Jerky, which I ended up working for about a year as a COO after he came to our course. And Michael Pan went on Shark Tank after I left and got funded through Mark Cuban.
Oh, wow.
Very fun. So
Yeah.
you can find here in Temecula, if you go to Sprouts, you can go down and you can find Pan's Mushroom Jerky. And I used to cook it. I used to bag it. That
I've
whole
seen it.
time.
Yeah. I've, I've,
Yeah,
I've seen it. I think in Roots too. I've got to go
it
buy
is.
some.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome.
I used to cook that mushroom jerky all the time, and it's wonderful. But I was going through to be honest, I failed in my role at that business. I failed Michael, my partner, pretty heavily. Um, I was going through a very traumatic divorce, dealing with a lot of childhood stuff, and I was just not present in a way that I could really be the dynamic kind of leader that he needed me to be. So we decided to part ways, and it was 100% on me. It was just um, I was not in a place to perform at that level. So after I got a little bit healthier, I had come up with the concept that I'm still going to do. It's a subscription-based indoor dog parks in a with a glass covered dome that opens up for nice weather, has food and your veterinary services all in there. It's called National Bark. We already had a full team on it. And I say all that because one of the team guys on the advisory team, his name is Charles Swapsel. He's the CEO of a software development company called Foremost up there. And he was on my advisory team for National Bark. So we're sitting at lunch one day talking, and he was talking about this terrible experience that he had had at an oil change place, sitting there for an hour stuck in line. And I was telling him the story that I think you heard at the Chamber of Commerce about I have not once, but twice destroyed two car engines because I did not change the oil.
Hmm.
My very first car, and then in 2016, I'm ashamed to say, I did it again as a full grown adult,
No.
fully capable of managing his vehicle.
Well, it's a pain, You're just like,
Yeah.
you never want to get to it. It's like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. It's one of those last ditch things, and then then your car
And then
throws a
you're in trouble. Yep.
rut. Yeah.
So we were laughing, and so we were like, somebody should come up with like an oil change that comes to you. So that was where we left it. I remember a few months later we met again for lunch, and he goes, yeah, you remember that idea, and it wasn't called Oily at the time, but he's like, this young kid, his name is Makai. Makai is my co-founder. He came in and was trying to get a job at Foremost. He's a kind of brilliant coder. Um, he said, and he's interviewed with the founder of Foremost, and he's kind of a legendary coder, and he blew him away. He said he's kind of a generational talent. Well, I gave him the idea for the oil change that comes to you thing, and within 2 weeks he had built a prototype of it and was on it. And he literally gave him the idea, like, take it and run. Colton's busy with National Bark, I'm busy running this. So Makai and his best friend uh, Trey built the app, branded it. They did probably the best thing they could have ever done for Oily, which was come up with the branding, the name Oily, which is brilliant from a branding perspective, the color scheme, which is the bright pink versus kind of dark colors.
Yeah. Let me
They
pull up the site here.
Sure.
Hang on. Yeah. It's really cool.
Thank you. But they tried to get it off the ground for about 2 years, and there were two very young guys, 20, 21, didn't have any luck. So in 2021, in July, Charles, I was up in Salem, Oregon, with my current fiance. They invited me up to a meeting, and he said, hey, you remember that idea? Well, it's fully fledged. They've been trying to get it off the ground. It's called Oily. I told them about you, and they want to meet with you about possibly taking over as CEO. And obviously there was a talk about substantial ownership, and being a co-founder. And so it all worked out. And so that month we incorporated as a Delaware C Corp, and started on this journey. So it's been in development since 2019, and it started with me as of 2021. Immediately after starting that, I moved down to Temecula, California with my fiance, and we kind of started building out the business on all the aspects, how to recruit technicians. At first we were going after mechanics, like how are we going to, it's a two-sided marketplace like Uber and Instacart. So how do you even build a two-sided marketplace? It's really generally considered the toughest kind of startup to build, because you have to build customers and you have to build technicians, the people to fulfill the job at the same time. And you have to keep them both satisfied. If you don't have enough people to do the job, the customers are going to drop off. And if you don't have
Mhm.
enough work for the technicians, they're going to drop off. And so it's this constant balancing act. So over the course of the past couple years, we've refined the idea, made some strategic decisions about the app and our offerings, mainly that we were not going to offer full mechanic services like some other startups in this field, that we were going to focus. Our blue ocean strategy was we're going to do oil changes, because no matter what, you may not need a transmission replacement or remember who does them mobily for years, but twice a year, at least, everybody who drives an internal combustion engine needs what we do, and they cannot avoid it to their peril, like I did. You know,
Right, you got personal experience with that. You
yeah.
right?
So we decided that our blue ocean strategy was we were going to just do oil changes, and that we are specifically focusing on becoming synonymous with mobile oil changes. So an oily is not only a noun, it's a verb. So you're not getting an oil change, you're getting an oily. You don't go to Google,
Okay.
you go to Google to search, you use a Kleenex, even though it may come from Costco. And that is
Yeah.
our positioning, is that we will forever
So
be
now
known
I
as
need
an
to
oily.
say I need an oily.
Yeah, there you go.
I gotta get me an
Um,
oily now.
well, the kind of the learning out of this, the mistake that I think I made early on was thinking that I could in Temecula, we were testing the business out in the Oregon area. And I didn't have a team up there to promote it. It was just the coders, and they're not great at going out and talking to people, and very shy and kind of socially awkward in those kind of situations, like most people are. And I'm,
Mhm.
pretty decent at talking in public. And so we went through trying to build it up there, and then it only occurred to us this. We went through a round of attempting to fund it. We built kind of projections for the next 10 years. We got the market size. We know exactly how many oil changes happen in the top 200 cities across the country. So we know exactly where we're going to move next. We know the game plan. Um, and we thought we could go out and get investment, but right as we started to go out is when this investment market collapsed. So
Mm.
SVB happened, investment dried up for our type of startup, for all startups really, but especially when you're not an AI app and when you're not a crypto app, you're something completely unsexy like oil changes, like, come invest in my plumbing company. It's not sexy. So we spent about 6 months trying to go for funding, and it became apparent that what most people wanted to see was traction, um, which was great because it actually put us in a great position to kind of grind it out. So in October, November of 2023, this past year, we decided to move all the operations down here to Temecula and Murrieta.
Mhm.
Um, and it turns out through my research, Temecula and Murrieta have the highest number of cars per capita in the entire United States. It's 2.62
That's
cars
interesting.
per house. Yep.
Wow.
Which, if you think about it, we're kind of a commuter central, and there's no very little public transportation for an area this size. There's no light rail, very limited bus service. It makes sense that most people have to have cars, and they commute to San Diego, LA, Corona. Um,
Yeah, get
so
anywhere, it's an hour drive, right?
exactly.
We're like in
So
this
the
little
premise
hole.
Well, the premise of Oily is basically right now, it is literally you download the app. It takes about 2 seconds to scan the VIN on your car. And in about 2 minutes, you add your car, your location, a credit card, and pick a time and a date. And an Oily technician will show up to your house, your place of business, and change your oil on the spot. It takes roughly we did one just last night. It took 18 minutes, 18 minutes to 25 minutes. We put down a oil spill proof mat in the vehicle. I'm a huge hiker and outdoor enthusiast, so I will not allow us to desecrate the ground with spilling oil. So there's not a drop of oil on the ground. We
Mhm.
dispose of it, and your oil change is done in easily under half an hour at your work, at your home, whatnot. So you can, one, avoid destroying your car engine and all the cost that comes along with that. But two, that's more time with your family. That's more time, kicking the ball with your kids. That's more time. That's a mom not having to. The number of moms that have told me, "Oh my God, not having to take my kids down and sit in the line at Valvoline or Jiffy Lube for an hour while they're screaming in the back on my one day off. That you
Mhm.
came and I was able to stay in the house and make them lunch and all that, and my oil change is done in 30 minutes. It's brilliant." So. Um, our current business model is that we're using independent contractors, but eventually the plan is that all of these guys will be W-2 employees as we
Okay.
grow. And
You're now in California, Oregon, and Washington.
yes.
That's
Now,
great.
right now, in all fairness, because that hasn't been updated, we are focusing on California. We have fleet services up in Washington, and but we aren't actively doing anything in uh, Oregon and Washington. However, we have the technicians and the app is built for that once we get through focusing on Temecula and Murrieta.
Very cool. Yeah, I've signed up for the app. I got to get an appointment
Oh, fantastic.
and get that going. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm actually I've put a challenge up on Facebook. I said I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna sign up from the app, and then I'm gonna share the experience on Facebook.
Wonderful.
So I'm fully anticipating that it's going to go really well.
Well, thank you. I think you'll find it a fascinating experience on um, talk about we feel like it's a tectonic shift in the experience because it to a person, people go like, how has nobody thought of this before? Because once you get it at home and you just drop your keys out and the guy comes back 20 minutes later, hands you your keys back and it's done and you didn't have to go anywhere. It feels like kind of a luxurious experience on why the heck haven't we done this before?
Yeah, yeah. Well, back in I remember in the 80s and 90s, there was lots of people doing mobile car washes, and I guess there's
Mhm.
still some around, but there really wasn't anybody doing mobile oil changes that I knew of, especially
Yeah.
not this efficient. I mean, it's really easy to go on the app, sign up, and just boom, it's like done. So,
One of the next enhancements we're bringing, my co-founder Makai, it is our top priority. Um, it's our two biggest ones. Is our next enhancement we're bringing is that basically because Uber and those kind of marketplaces, they're unpredictable and when you'll need them. We know that Jim, if you get yours done and you know that every 5,000 miles, which is roughly every 4 months for you, you're going to need an oil change. Then we can just do a set it and forget it in the app where basically you never have to think about it again. Every 4 months, 2 weeks before, you're going to get a text from Oily that says, "Hey, Jim, in 2 weeks, your Oily scheduled at your house just like last time at this time. Does that still work for you, or do you want to change it? If it works for you, then see you on Tuesday." So the mental load for me, particularly, because I always forget, the mental
mhm.
load goes away. Of a technician's just going to show up, take care of your oil changes, and you never have to think about it again. It literally puts it on set it and forget it mode, and that
Sweet.
we're really excited about.
Got a little technical question, personal, since we're here. My car's parked in the driveway, a little bit of an
Mhm.
angle. Is that a problem?
I mean, we've done it in driveways. Our typical preference is, and you get instructions on once you book your oily that tells you, hey, please at least have let it rest for an hour before, so the technician
Yeah.
doesn't get burned by the hot oil, etc. And if you can get it on a flat surface, great. It's always going to be on a slight incline anyway. One of the ways that we're so efficient and quick is we don't jack your vehicle up. We drive it up onto a set of ramps. So it just takes about 10 seconds to get it up on a set of ramps. And then our technician just slides under, drains it. So it's already at a slight angle. And that's no problem. We have a 30 by 10 foot cloth, impermeable cloth specifically for this that catches any spilled oil. But Matthew, our current technician here, who's amazing, is pretty amazing in understanding gravity and where he'll need to position
All right, cool. All
the
right,
catch pan.
awesome. Well, I think this has been fun. Time goes so quick. I have one more question. You got time for one more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I appreciate
Awesome.
this.
Well, I asked this on everybody on the show, and it's this: taking a look at your whole life. What was the boldest leadership decision that you've made, and what were the consequences?
Man, that's a big one. The boldest leadership decision. Oh, I would honestly say, man, and this is just coming off the top of the head, and it's kind of a family leadership decision. But my ex-wife and I were working at JP Morgan Chase in Tempe, Arizona, and there was a former manager of mine I saw walk in the building I hadn't seen in months. I just gave you the thumbs up. I don't know how, but
It's the first time I've seen that.
it's this reaction thing on a Mac. Apparently, when you give a thumbs up, or certain things you can do that make it do balloons. Apparently,
Interesting. Okay.
but I'm gonna say this is, yeah, this is. You know what? I may back that up one step. That's an interesting one. Prior to that, when my ex and we were living in El Paso, and we were living in a mobile home in West Texas, a trailer, and she had just gotten pregnant, and everything around us, every bit of family, any friends said, okay, well, we were planning to move to Phoenix with my band, and make it. And every everybody said you can't go now. You're going to need to support a family. Like, you guys don't even have jobs out there. And I said, you know what? This is the time of our life where we're pushing off away from the shore. And even if it's a baby on the way, and we had $600 in our pocket and didn't even have an apartment over there or anything. And we packed up our stuff on a flatbed truck, couldn't even afford to put it in a moving truck, and hauled it from El Paso, Texas to Phoenix, Arizona, found an apartment, and both of us within a couple weeks had found jobs, and we just scrapped it out. So I think that probably that to kick away from the shore when everything in you said no, stay close to home, you've got a support network here and all of that,
Mm.
to say no, this is my adventure and I'll be damned, we're going to make it. um, had I stayed in that hometown, had I stayed in that trailer and lived that life, I wouldn't be here now. So I think saying, like, even with all the odds against us and all the headwind against us, to kick off the shore and say, you know what, we're still going on this adventure now, sight unseen, can't see over the horizon, don't know what's coming, and did that. And that decision making has changed my life. And all that to say, it happened again when I was telling you about the guy at JP Morgan Chase. He had said, I've been down in San Antonio opening this new site. Um, and they're picking up people to go down there, and you can pick up a new position and all that. And 2 weeks later, even though we had a whole life in Phoenix, Arizona, we were in San Antonio, Texas. We just kicked off the shore again and led to beautiful things. So I think that not being afraid to um, step into the wild, not knowing what is out there. And then obviously the consequences are, well, here I am now. Like, I'm able to take something as crazy as oily that most people think, like, how the hell do you start something like that? And we are seeing success on the horizon, and it already starting to happen in a way that's um, more rewarding than I could possibly explain, actually.
Ah,
A
fantastic.
great question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's awesome.
Sure.
Well, I appreciate you joining me on the show today. And a great episode. I'm excited to share it, and we will sign off and see you again soon. And hang on a sec.
Sure. Thanks for this, Jim. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise.